There was once a man hailed as the greatest military genius in European history. He could shake an entire continent with a single campaign, redraw maps in a matter of days, and throw enemy armies into chaos with lightning-fast strikes. And yet, on one quiet afternoon in June 1815, that same man, Napoleon Bonaparte, was defeated, not by a revolutionary, nor a bold young general, but by a cautious, conservative British officer known more for his restraint than his brilliance. How did Napoleon, the man who had conquered Europe, lose his final battle? Was it poor tactics, bad weather, or was it something deeper, the final, desperate move of a man chasing past glory in a world that had already moved on? This video tells the full story of the Battle of Waterloo, not as myth, not as legend, but as it really happened, through strategy, miscalculation, and consequence, a turning point that changed the fate of modern Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, newly annexed by France. From the start, he was an outsider, speaking Corsican with an Italian accent, looked down on by the French aristocracy, poor, and ridiculed, but instead of surrendering to that status, he climbed, using nothing but skill. A brilliant student of mathematics, Napoleon became an artillery officer, a branch that demanded precision, science, and cold logic. He entered military service just as the old world order collapsed during the French Revolution. And in the chaos, talent rose fast. By age 26, he was commanding French armies in Italy, crushing Austrian forces in rapid-fire campaigns. In Egypt, he decimated the Mamluks under the shadow of the pyramids. At Austerlitz, he defeated the Russian-Austrian coalition in a textbook maneuver still studied in war colleges today. But there was one thing Napoleon never learned: how to stop. Every victory only made him reach further. More territory, more power, more risk. For him, war wasn't a tool, it was an identity, a necessity, the thing that defined his fame, his rule, and ultimately, his downfall. His opposite was Arthur Wellesley, later known as the Duke of Wellington. Born in the same year, 1769, into the British aristocracy, but unlike Napoleon, he showed no signs of greatness early on. At Eton, he was awkward, isolated. His own mother called him fit only to be cannon fodder. But in India, where the British Empire was struggling with war and chaos, Wellesley quietly developed his military philosophy. Victory doesn't come from daring moves, it comes from preparation, discipline, and knowing your limits. If Napoleon was a storm, loud, violent, unpredictable, Wellington was a stone wall, patient, steady, unshakable. Napoleon loved the gamble. Wellington only fought when he had no other choice. Napoleon commanded vast armies of 100,000 men or more. Wellington often had less, and so he learned to make every bullet, every soldier, every second count. Their contrast wasn't just between two men, it was between two eras. Two philosophies of power, two value systems, and at Waterloo, those two forces would collide, for the final time, where every strength, every weakness, every belief would be tested to the breaking point. By 1805, after his legendary victory at Austerlitz, Napoleon was nearly the undisputed master of Europe. In just 100 days, he marched thousands of miles, crushed the Russian and Austrian empires, and shattered the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire. It wasn't just military success, it was proof of genius. He reformed French law with the Napoleonic Code, centralized government, built national schools, and imposed order on chaos. To many across Europe, he represented a new model, one of efficiency, justice, and modernity. But here was the paradox. The man who brought reform and reason could not stop acting like a conqueror. The more he built, the more he wanted. He had many chances to stop, to secure peace after each victory. Jena, Friedland, Wagram. He could have consolidated France's position. Instead, he kept pushing. He installed his brother as King of Spain, seized Italy, married an Austrian princess to legitimize his dynasty. And then came the three mistakes that would destroy him. First, the war in Spain. He thought a few French divisions could pacify the region. But the Spanish rose in revolt. Guerrilla warfare erupted everywhere. The British, led by Wellington, landed in Portugal, opening a second front. Napoleon had to send hundreds of thousands of troops just to hold ground. It bled him dry. Second, the Russian invasion of 1812. With an army of over 600,000, the largest Europe had ever seen, Napoleon marched into Russia, hoping to repeat his earlier glories. But the Russians refused to fight. They retreated, burned their own towns, and let winter do the rest. Napoleon reached Moscow, only to find a city on fire. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion set in. Of the 600,000 men he brought, barely 20,000 returned. Third, he refused to stop, even when the writing was on the wall. After the Russian disaster, Europe united, Prussia, Austria, Britain, Sweden, Russia, all joined against him. Napoleon scraped together new armies, many were teenage conscripts with no training. He won a few battles, but he could no longer reverse the tide. At Leipzig, in 1813, the Battle of Nations, he was decisively defeated. 1 year later, the Allies entered Paris. Napoleon abdicated. He was exiled to the island of Elba. The game seemed over, but it wasn't. In March 1815, Napoleon escaped from exile on the island of Elba. Within days, he was back on French soil, and the crowds welcomed him not as a fugitive, but as a savior. Entire army units defected to join him. By the time he reached Paris, King Louis XVIII had fled without a fight. Napoleon reclaimed the throne without firing a single shot. History calls this brief return to power the 100 Days. It would be his last. But this time, things were different. Napoleon was 46, older, heavier, no longer the man of 1805. And Europe was no longer divided. His old enemies had learned. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia now stood united, not to contain him, but to destroy him for good. Napoleon knew he couldn't wait. He had to strike first. His plan: attack the weakest point of the Allied coalition, the border region of Belgium, where British and Prussian forces were still gathering but had not yet fully coordinated. His goal was bold but simple: divide and conquer. Defeat each army separately before they could join forces. On paper, it made perfect sense. But this time, Napoleon wasn't facing confused monarchs and slow generals. His opponents, especially Wellington, were ready. Blank, blank. June 15, 1815. Napoleon moved fast. He pushed his army over the southern border of Belgium in a surprise offensive. Within 48 hours, the French had seized the town of Charleroi and were threatening two key positions: Leni, where the main Prussian army under Field Marshal Blücher was stationed; Quatre Bras, a strategic crossroads linking the British and Prussian lines. Napoleon split his forces. He personally led the assault on Leni. Marshal Ney was ordered to seize Quatre Bras and prevent Wellington from aiding the Prussians. If both attacks succeeded, Napoleon could isolate and crush each army, one by one. Blank. June 16, the Battle of Leni. Napoleon launched a brutal assault on the villages around Leni. The Prussians held the high ground, fortified with stone walls, churches, and narrow lanes. The fighting was savage, house by house, street by street. 3 French attacks failed to break the line. Only late in the afternoon did Napoleon unleash his elite Imperial Guard, the best troops in his army. At the same moment, Blücher, aged and fearless, personally led a counterattack on horseback. In the chaos, his horse was shot and crushed him beneath its weight. He nearly died, trampled underfoot. But night fell. French soldiers didn't recognize the wounded man as the enemy commander. Blücher was rescued. His army, however, began to retreat. It was a clear French victory, the last battlefield victory of Napoleon's life. But it was incomplete. Crucially, Napoleon didn't pursue. He failed to destroy the Prussians. He assumed they would retreat east, toward their homeland. He was wrong. Blücher instead pulled his forces north, keeping open lines of communication with Wellington, preparing to return. That one decision would change the entire campaign. Blank. Meanwhile at Quatre Bras, Marshal Ney, the man tasked with cutting off Wellington's support, hesitated. On the morning of June 16, Ney had around 20,000 troops. His opponents, a few thousand Dutch and Belgian troops defending the crossroads. Had Ney attacked immediately, he could have seized it and severed the Allied connection. But Ney didn't grasp the full strategic picture. He didn't know Napoleon's exact plan, and he delayed. By midday, Wellington had arrived and rushed in reinforcements. The fighting turned brutal. French forces initially pushed back the Dutch and the Germans from Brunswick. But British units, especially the legendary 95th Rifles, held their ground with deadly precision. Around 3 p.m., Wellington returned to the field just as Ney launched a furious cavalry assault. Charges surged through wheat fields and around the Bossu woods. But the British countered with a classic defense: infantry squares, unbreakable by cavalry, and trained to perfection. Ney's attack failed. By nightfall, he still hadn't taken Quatre Bras. Wellington, though bloodied, held the position. But when news reached him that Blücher had been defeated at Leni, Wellington made a critical decision. He couldn't stay here. If he didn't move, he risked being trapped and crushed between Napoleon's forces. That night, under cover of darkness, he ordered a withdrawal northward, to a place called Mont Saint-Jean, just south of the village of Waterloo. A ridge, 2 fortified farms, perfect for defense. There, he would make his stand. Blank, underscore, blank. Napoleon, meanwhile, believed the Prussians were finished. He thought he had only one job left. Defeat Wellington, and victory would be his once more. He had no idea that Blücher, the man nearly killed 2 days earlier, was already preparing a comeback. And Wellington, who had never directly faced Napoleon before, was about to prove that sometimes defense can make history. Blank, underscore, blank. June 18, 1815, a quiet Belgian field, just south of Brussels. Two of the greatest armies in Europe stood ready to decide the fate of a continent. The first assault, Hougoumont and the brothers' mistake. At 11 a.m., the battle began. French artillery opened fire on Hougoumont, a fortified farm on Wellington's right flank. Defended by about 1,500 troops from Britain, Hanover, and Nassau, Napoleon intended it as a diversion. But his younger brother, Jerome Bonaparte, saw it as a matter of honor. He committed not one, but 2 full divisions to take the farm, then part of a corps. Every time French troops broke into the courtyard, British defenders slammed the gates shut and counterattacked with bayonets and buckshot. The fighting was so brutal that, as one soldier later said, the floors of Hougoumont were slick with blood. Wellington, watching from a distance, saw what was happening. He smiled. Hougoumont is a trap, and they've walked straight into it. Blank, underscore, blank. The main attack. D'Erlon and the price of a bad formation. At 1 p.m., Napoleon launched his main offensive. D'Erlon's corps, 20,000 men, marched straight at the Allied center and left flank. But they used a deep column formation, powerful if it reached enemy lines, but slow and vulnerable to concentrated fire. As the French advanced, they ran into devastating musket volleys from the 95th Rifles, elite British marksmen, and artillery fire from both flanks. Wellington's men waited until the French were close, then unleashed a wall of lead. Entire front ranks collapsed like wheat before the scythe. Napoleon thought victory was near, until Wellington sprang a trap of his own. British heavy cavalry, hidden behind the ridge, charged like a thunderstorm. They smashed into the disorganized French columns, scattering men and trampling the wounded. But the British cavalry went too far. Drunk on momentum, they pursued deep into enemy lines, straight into counter-fire and French lances. Most of the brigade was wiped out. Both sides suffered heavy losses. But the most important result, Napoleon's first major assault had failed. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe for more clear, thought-provoking stories from history. Blank, underscore, blank. Ney's catastrophic mistake, the cavalry charges. Around 4 p.m., Marshal Ney, commanding at the center, believed the British were retreating. In reality, they were simply pulling back to resupply and tighten formations, standard defensive tactics. Ney misunderstood. He thought the British line was collapsing, and he acted fast. He threw in all the cavalry he had left. No infantry support, no artillery coordination, just wave after wave of cavalry charging up the slope. They met dozens of British infantry squares, the most effective formation against cavalry. And these were veterans of the Peninsular War, drilled, steady, unbreakable. The French charged, circled, fired pistols, swung sabers, then withdrew, then charged again, and again. For nearly 2 hours, the cavalry threw itself against those squares. And they broke, not the squares, but the last of France's mobile strength. Wellington stood calmly under fire, urging his men on. When asked if it was time to retreat, he shook his head. Not just yet, I see no reason to withdraw. Blank, underscore, blank. La Haye Sainte falls, and the final gamble. By 6 p.m., La Haye Sainte, a vital farm at the center of the British line, finally fell. The German defenders had run out of ammunition. Now Napoleon had a chance. He could position artillery close enough to fire directly into the heart of Wellington's forces. Marshal Ney demanded reinforcements, and asked for the unthinkable. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite, undefeated, legendary. At first, Napoleon refused, but then came the worst news. The Prussians had arrived. Grouchy had failed to stop them. The right flank was collapsing. This was it. Napoleon gave the order. Blank, underscore, blank. The Imperial Guard attacks, and the end of the Empire. Around 7 p.m., 4 battalions of the Imperial Guard began their march up the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean. Drums pounding, flags waving, boots thundering like war drums. Wellington gave a silent signal. His troops lay down, hidden behind the crest. When the Guard crested the ridge, Wellington shouted, "Now!" His men stood and fired point-blank volleys. The Imperial Guard staggered. Some units kept advancing. But then, from the right, the Prussians struck. The French rear was exposed. A French officer screamed in disbelief. "Le Garde recule." The Guard is retreating. That phrase had never been uttered in Napoleon's military career. It was the end of the myth. And the end of the empire. Wellington drew his sword, raised his hat, and ordered, "General, advance." The French army shattered. Only a few battalions tried to cover the retreat. The rest fled, dropped weapons, stripped insignia, ran for their lives. Napoleon abandoned the battlefield and raced for Paris. He would never command an army again. The Prussian hammer, and the true decisive blow. Today, when people speak of Waterloo, they often remember Wellington. But without the Prussians under Blücher, Napoleon might not have lost, or at least, not lost so quickly. After Leni, Blücher didn't retreat east as Napoleon expected. He withdrew north, staying in contact with Wellington. Though wounded, Blücher promised, "We will come, even if we must crawl." On June 17, over 50,000 Prussian troops marched through forests and mud, facing logistical chaos, but they kept moving. Their mantra was repeated like a sacred oath. Forward, forward, toward the sound of the guns. At 4 p.m. on June 18, the first Prussian units arrived, attacking the French right at Plancenoit. Behind Napoleon's line, Napoleon had to divert an entire corps, and even his young guard, to hold the village. As he struggled to contain the Prussians, more of Blücher's forces arrived. Pressure built, Napoleon's right was cracking, and at that exact moment, Wellington struck from the front. The Dutch, the British, the Brunswickers surged forward. The French were attacked from the front, the rear, and the flank. Panic spread, officers fled, soldiers dropped weapons, units disintegrated. Some French troops mistook the Prussians for reinforcements, until the Prussian cannons opened fire on their backs. Only a few battalions of the old guard kept formation, firing, retreating, dying with dignity. The rest, gone. Blücher, the man who had nearly died under his horse at Leni, now rode his steed through the corpses of the French army. He met Wellington in the twilight. The Prussian firebrand, the British aristocrat, two old men, no words, just a handshake. They both knew, Europe had changed. Waterloo didn't just end a battle, it ended an entire era. Napoleon, the emperor who once made all of Europe tremble, was exiled a second time. This time, not to a nearby island, but to St. Helena, a remote rock in the South Atlantic, where he would spend his final years in bitter isolation. The First French Empire was no more. Meanwhile, Britain rose. The victory at Waterloo laid the foundations for a century of British global dominance, building an empire that stretched from India to Africa, Southeast Asia to Canada. It was after Waterloo that the phrase became true. The sun never sets on the British Empire. For Prussia, the battle was a launchpad for something even bigger. National pride surged, and just a few decades later, a unified Germany would rise, forged under Otto von Bismarck, shifting the balance of power across Europe once again. But Waterloo also left behind a dangerous lesson. Many generals of future generations believed that a single, decisive battle could determine the outcome of an entire war. That belief, combined with the idea that great victory required great sacrifice, helped pave the way for the horrors of World War I. And so, Waterloo became more than a place. It became a symbol, not just of Napoleon's defeat, but of a deeper truth. No matter how brilliant, no single man can bend history forever by sheer will. After the battle, the Duke of Wellington said a line that became legendary. They came on in the old way, and we defeated them in the old way. Short, cold, devastating. Waterloo wasn't a victory of clever tricks. It was a victory of discipline, endurance, and perhaps a bit of luck. It marked the end of an age when people still believed that great men, with swords and speeches, could shape the world alone. What came next was different. An age of factories, of empires, of global wars beyond imagination. Waterloo ended a dream, but it opened the door to new illusions. And even today, when we speak of a defeat so total it cannot be undone, we still say, that was his Waterloo. Clapperboard, thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe for more clear, thought-provoking stories from history. See you in the next episode.